thank you. I appreciate your support, Councillor President. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the City Planning, Economic Development and Environment Committee meeting of the 13th of July. I declare this meeting open at 9 a.m. and I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of land on which we meet and their elders past, present and emerging. Due to technology restraints and issues, we are going to adjourn the meeting for 30 minutes to reopen at 9:30. That is a procedural motion that I will move. All in favour? That has been carried unanimously. Thank you very much, councillors. The meeting is now closed until 9:30. The time being 9:30, can I have someone move that in accordance with section 261 of the Local Government Regulation 2012, the meeting be reopened? Thank you, Councillor Kransky. Seconded by Councillor Bradley. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Mr. Mayor? That has been carried unanimously. We'll start again because the public's with us now. I'd like to begin today's meeting by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we're gathered, and their elders past, present and emerging, and apologise to members of the public for the late start. We had some technological difficulties. Due to the Queensland Government's current COVID-19 restrictions, this week's committee meetings will not have a physical public gallery. The health, safety and wellbeing of local staff and community is Council's top priority. As such, I would like to mention an additional special welcome to the members of our community who are watching today's meeting via the live stream. Yay. I would also like to advise attendees in the room that this meeting is being webcast and audio recorded, and I remind attendees to practice social distancing and take the necessary safety precautions. As today's agenda does contain a confidential report, I note that a proposed motion to suspend section 7.1A6 of the Local Government and Committee Meeting Code for the purposes of audio recording the closed sessions in today's meeting for Council's internal confidential use only is now displaying on the screen. Thank you. Is there a mover for this motion? Thank you, Councillor Russell, seconded by Councillor Hall. Look, he wanted to do it. I could see he wanted to. All those in favour? That motion has been carried unanimously. Excellent. Skipping straight forward. We will begin. I don't have any leaves of absences because all councillors are here today, and a special welcome back to Councillor Russell. We'll move into item 4.1, which is the Local Government Association of Queensland attendance and motions for the 125th Annual Conference. I will now refer to Kirsten Pinsner. Yes. To speak to her report. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Well done on pronouncing my name.
It's taken 6 months.
Some people never get it. So just to give some context to motions that go before LGAQ conference. First of all, generally speaking, the LGAQ Motions Committee will filter out any motions relating to individual projects or projects relevant to an individual council. As priorities in the Council's advocacy strategy relate largely to individual projects, these have not been raised as a potential motion for LGAQ conference. Where annual conference motions can be of value is in highlighting policy, program, regulatory or funding issues that require advocacy support from the LGAQ to federal and state governments that involve multiple councils. So last year's motions that were put by Logan to Council related to the release of the Queensland State Infrastructure Plan, the future of waste levy advance payments, access and inclusion funding, whole of life funding for new facilities or upgrades, and clarification of process and responsibilities in relation to buildings. We've asked the LGAQ to provide a report and an update in relation to where they are with those particular motions, and I will be circulating that to Council, and in future we will be including updates on our motions in our quarterly report. So this year we're focusing again on waste management, in this case the implementation of the SEQ waste management strategy. So the motion is in relation to getting state and federal government funding for the implementation of that strategy, particularly given both the Queensland Government's focus on waste and its targets in terms of reducing waste going into landfill and the quite significant transition costs that would be involved in meeting those targets, and the desire to defray those costs so that ratepayers aren't actually going to be responsible for paying those costs, which will be well over $200 million, the current estimates for this first phase. So over to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Pinsner. Are there any questions for this one? Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you. Just a quick question. With the theme conference being together, just wondering, last year, was there any motions up in regards to Inland Rail that we put up?
I would have to check, Councillor Wilcox.
Not that I recall. Councillor Hermeyer, do you recall one? No.
Just wondering, is it something that they normally discuss there? Because Inland Rail is such a huge project.
Again, it would have to be something where it was a multi-council type issue. So in general, when my experience has been that when discussions are relating to the impacts of a project on communities, the advocacy approach that the LGAQ takes is in relation to the role of councils in influencing any conditions relating to how that project operates, as opposed to the individual project itself. And that's, for example, in relation to major resource projects, it will be around the necessity of consulting with local government in relation to whatever conditions, project conditions are put on that project to minimise the impacts on communities, as opposed to the individual project itself.
So would this not be the perfect opportunity for the councils, because there's so many councils involved regarding Inland Rail, to talk about this at LGAQ and to put a motion up? I don't want to talk about a motion specifically, but would this not be the perfect opportunity to put something up? Darren?
Mr. Mayor.
I'd just like to respond, Mr. Chair. I believe that it wouldn't be in our interest because I know the composition of the group that we're going to be with, and I don't believe we'd get it up. It's very political. A lot of the councillors vote on political lines, and when you look at the amount of local authorities that are unduly affected, there's us. I don't know how many other people we've managed to get support, and I think based on that, I don't think it'd be in our interest to actually put anything up about the light rail. Sorry, the Inland Rail.
That's right. So with LGAQ, is LGAQ the whole of Queensland? So I know that if you were to put something up, you will get support from up north. You will get support from Gladstone to, you know, the Banana Shire.
So in the context of 74 councils, of which 2 are impacted, us and Brisbane, and then maybe 5 would have it run through there if they wanted it relocated, you're still going to be pushing your barrow up a long hill because it doesn't impact anybody else. But the time for motions was before committee, not on at committee. But we can certainly, it doesn't stop Councillor Heremyah and I from like raising concerns while we're at LGAQ and speaking to other councils and engaging with them. Like those conversations can definitely happen. But as far as a formal motion goes, it's pretty restrictive about what they're interested in. It tends to be more policy orientated because the most effective platform for LGAQ to advocate on is from councils as a cohort to state and federal governments. And it's a whole of Queensland approach. Did I see another hand go up while I was talking there? Councillor Karansky.
That being said, when I've attended LGAQ conference in the past, there's been quite a focus that had been regionally based, as I recall. There were issues pertaining to bushfire and animals in northern Queensland and various other things. Much like Councillor Wilcox, I would have thought that this was potentially an opportunity to at least have that opportunity considered. Logan's made a very firm stance on where we sit on this issue. When is the cut-off for us to be able to submit?
The cut-off is in August. I'd have to get the specific date. Just noting that the motion that is in front of you at the moment is a regionally focused motion. As I said, generally speaking, when it comes to projects and projects that impact on communities, the approach that LGAQ takes is to emphasise the importance of consulting with the council of that community to ensure that the measures put in place mitigate those impacts. That tends to be how they've done it. If you wish to have a motion put to LGAQ conference in relation to Inland Rail, it's probably important that it already be a resolution that has been passed by council itself. So as far as I'm aware, in relation to Inland Rail, the main resolutions that council have made was in that last council meeting when there was a series of motions put forward. or a series of resolutions made in terms of the approval process and the conditions on any approval for Inland Rail. If council wanted to put a motion to conference, I would suggest that it needs to be a position that council itself has agreed.
So in order to assist Councillor Wilcox with her advocacy, how would you recommend she moves forward?
Her advocacy in what is it that you specifically, Councillor Wilcox, would like us to advocate for apart from what has already been considered?
That I'm not sure of at the moment. I was trying to explore if we could put in a secondary motion up for Inland Rail.
So just on the 23rd of June, an email went out calling for interest in having motions. That was the time to express an interest in this motion. Your horse is bolted, because to try and do it on the fly now, to try and get something up when it's not part of the report, we haven't considered the wording. You're going to have to maybe squeeze it in as a referral to ordinary council, maybe. So the 3 weeks previous was the ideal time to be prepped for that. Councillor Kransky.
With respect, I do accept that the cut-off was the 23rd of June, and I acknowledge that, but obviously this is of grave concern to residents on that corridor, and if Councillor Wilcox would like to progress with this train of thinking, she still has time, is my understanding from the officer, but she needs to get her roller skates on, is what I'm hearing.
She needed to get her, if it was of grave concern, then the last 3 weeks was the best time to do the work on it.
I acknowledge
So
that.
now you've got 5 days.
My apologies.
And you've got to get, you've got 5 days before ordinary council to get a position of council up and to get a motion up, which might be doable. And if you want to push it, you can certainly try, but it'll be like a report to ordinary council, because this report doesn't have a motion in it. That's the challenge. So we can't change the report on the fly, and we can't put a motion into a recommendation. So and that doesn't mean we can't advocate. I think we can achieve the outcome that you're trying to achieve, which is actually talking to other councils and raising interest and raising the temperature on Inland Rail. I don't think you're going to, unless you can move very, very quickly over the next 7 days, I think you're going to struggle to get a position of council and a motion by ordinary council. I've got Councillor Jeremiah and then Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Just to draw it back as to what is a motion and how a motion is treated at the LGAQ conference. How many motions did we vote on and see at the last LGAQ conference, John? There were quite a few.
Just over 100. Just over 100.
Just over 100. So they come up on a board, on a PowerPoint. There's a few sentences. You look at it and then you click a button on your remote. So I think what the chair mentioned about advocacy and talking to the different stakeholders that all gather in Mackay in October will really be of good value. I think a motion rushed in, I agree with the Mayor, it's not in our best interest at this point.
Thank you, Councillor Jeremiah. Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I think that if you were going to bring something to the table on this, it'd have to be a very well worded, scripted resolution, because I wouldn't undersell the other mayors, and I acknowledge that, reading the Australian, that this project is seen as of national significance. Most of the Conservative part of politics sees this as a major project that must go ahead, and I believe that the majority of councils are led by LNP people, and I believe that they would do their research and they would know where to vote on this. So we couldn't pull a fast one on them, suggesting that it'd have to be a very well worded, scripted, and not portray this as not wanting it. You would have to be very insular in your approach, in that it affects Logan and not the others, because they see this as a win. We are in a boat with very few other people rowing in one direction. We've got everyone else rowing against us, and I just think that if we were to get it wrong, then they could use it against us, and it would look like the majority of the LGAQ support the inland rail. When I go to the Council of Mayors, I debate this and I lose at the Council of Mayors because I don't even have the numbers in the local inner sanctum of the southeast Queensland area, let alone go outside of southeast Queensland where you've got seats like Thurungara and Townsville and all that, all dominated by LNP people. I just think we're just kicking it uphill. I would rather go the approach we're doing at the moment. I don't put that much emphasis on those outcomes. LGAQ, I think we need to fight our own fight and keep going the way we're going, but leave this alone because it could bite us in the backside.
The other challenge too is, what are we asking for? If we're asking for what we're already asking for, which is appropriate mitigations and noise barriers, that's just for Logan, that's not a whole of Queensland motion. If the motion is we want to see it relocated so it doesn't go through Logan whatsoever, then we have to be able to demonstrate why that's beneficial to the whole state instead of just to us, which, again, possible, but it'll be a big push if you want to achieve it between now and next week. So if you want to do it, ordinary council is the pathway to do it through, and there'll probably be some staff that could try and help you with it. Any further questions? Excellent. Can I have someone to move the report? Thank you, Councillor Bradley, seconded by Councillor Herrenmeyer. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That is carried unanimously. Is there do you have any GB for us, Kirsten? Dr. Scott, do you have any GB up the back there? No? Councillors, do you have any GB for the ICT Director? No? Fantastic. Thank you very much. We will now move on to item 5.1, which is a report on the Logan Plan 2025, a commencement of a new planning scheme. I'll just wait for the staff to come into the room because due to COVID restrictions, we have limited numbers on how many people can be here at any given time. I'd like to welcome the Director of Strategy and Sustainability, Mr. David Hanson, to the front, and the Manager for Economic Development and Strategy, Mr. David Radich. I've opened the report and it's ready for you to speak to Dave at your leisure. Before I move in, nearly forgot all day. Do any councillors have any conflicts of interest on the planning scheme report? No, thank you. Off you go, Dave.
It's on? Great. Good morning, councillors. Through the chair, council has undertaken quite a comprehensive review of the performance of our current planning scheme. This has been a real team effort across all branches of council, so I thank everyone for their contribution to this work. What we've found is that the planning scheme, as it stands today, has stimulated quite a lot of growth, some growth in areas that we expected, some growth in areas that we didn't expect, but also quite a lot of employment growth. So the planning scheme itself, as it stands, has been a good planning scheme. We have undertaken the review and we believe there's probably some areas that we can look at to strengthen the provisions in the planning scheme, particularly around protecting the environment, better ways to manage growth across our city, so both growth in the infill, our established areas of our city, and growth in some of our emerging communities, so our newer parts of the city. With the current planning scheme and the industrial growth that we've seen and the phenomenal economic development that we've seen, there needs to be a close look at how we provide a pipeline of land for employment purposes and for jobs. So we need to look at where is the next opportunity for Logan's economic growth fronts and the rezoning of land for future employment. We also need to make sure that we protect our communities from natural hazards. there's some work that we need to do, which is outlined in the report, that talks about upgrading some of our provisions to some best practice provisions to ensure that our community is safe from natural hazards and floods. Those are the more technical parts of the planning scheme that we want to focus on, but fundamentally when I look at the new council and I look at what this new council's vision is, this is a real opportunity for the new council to stamp its mark on the city, install its new vision, both in the community vision and in the corporate plan, into the planning scheme. So it's a real opportunity for a new set of councillors to make their mark. And it's really important that the aspirations in the corporate plan, which is newly adopted, are reflected into the new planning scheme. So, for example, if we want to encourage the nighttime economy, we need to ensure that we have a planning scheme that doesn't mean that bars and restaurants are impact accessible. There are those sorts of provisions that we need to ensure are in the planning scheme to align with the corporate vision and the corporate plan. We are required to do a new planning scheme. The review has recommended that we do a complete new planning scheme. We don't do a series of amendments to address some of these concerns that have been raised in the committee report. The structure of the planning scheme itself will be the same. It's been celebrated industry-wide as a planning scheme that's quite easy to use. So we're not fundamentally chucking out the complete planning scheme. We're just focusing on certain areas where we feel that there can be an improvement. Overall, we've got a new council, we've got a new vision that needs to be reflected in the new planning scheme. So what we see on the ground, the built form, is the vision of this council. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Radich. I've got Councillor Bradley and Councillor Heremiah.
Thank you, Mr. Radich, for your explanation. I noticed in the report it refers to, we've got 5 years to do the planning scheme. So some of us, it says 5 in the report. So some of us may not be here when this is actually comes into play. I'm just curious because I had a meeting set up yesterday, which you were invited to. Unfortunately, you didn't come. And I'm just wondering, is this an opportune time for councillors to have input about where, like, there could be opportunities for properties to be acquired by council for to go into parks, for example, particularly with greater urbanisation of our some areas of our city, particularly the older areas. Is this an opportune time for that to play out?
Through Chair, sorry I wasn't able to attend yesterday's meeting. I had a clash with another meeting. I hope the Parks Manager provided my apologies. So yes, it is a 5-year project. What we will look at doing in 2023 is going for the first state interest. So that's when those things like the identification of additional parks, the identification of areas for urban activation will be drafted into policy and sent to the state government. So it is a 5-year project, but the drafting itself and the form and the structure of what we'll put to the state will be informed by this council, and we expect that to be submitted to the state for the first state interest in 2023.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Bradley. Councillor Heremiah, then Mayor Power.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Radich, you mentioned about industrial growth. I'm trying to picture this in my head where this growth is. So could you tell us where some of the big industrial growth sites are right now in the city?
Through the Chair, a lot of the industrial growth that I'm talking about and that the report refers to is in your division, Councillor Heremiah. So in Park Ridge, there is a large amount of land that is now under contract or sold. As I talked to in the report, we need to keep the pipeline of land available for jobs there. We need more jobs. The planning scheme itself, as it stands, has dictated a lot of the growth in your division, Councillor Heremiah, particularly the industrial growth. We need to keep that pipeline moving forward. We've been very fortunate within a COVID crisis to see such phenomenal growth.
So with that pipeline you've mentioned about employment land. So there's that current growth, and then there's a pipeline of future employment land underneath the current growth. So it'll keep on happening. Is that correct?
Through the Chair, so in your division there is area that has been earmarked for future employment land, but it hasn't been zoned as such. So what industry needs is certainty, and what we'll be doing as part of the new planning scheme is zoning more land for employment. Land that's already been noted in strategic documents for future employment areas, but this process will be a formal rezoning of some of those areas.
Great, thank you. And with you also mentioned emerging community areas. So I imagine that's less industrial, more residential. Can you comment on where some of the emerging community areas in our city are?
Through Chair, there are a number of emerging communities areas, and I'll remind the Council that the state government regional plan has dictated these emerging community areas and as how they have described it as future urban footprint, which we have zoned emerging communities. So we have Bar Scrub zoned emerging communities, we have Park Ridge South, Logan Reserve, all zoned currently as emerging communities.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Herrenmeyer. I have Mayor Power, Councillor Wilcox and myself.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just ask first up a question, and then I'll go into a bit of a spiel. David, in regards to the regional plan, obviously our plan will be emphasised by that outcome. When does that actually get put in place? What's the date?
Through Chair, just ask, so clarification, when the regional plan will come into place. So it's likely that the regional plan will be in a draft form when we are submitting our plan to the state government. So it's certainly something that we need to keep an eye on. We need to keep an eye on what the state government's doing in their regional plan and make sure that we're reflecting that in our planning scheme.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. Councillors, this is one of the most significant pieces of legislation that we'll have to play. I've been in the regional plan workshop already with the other mayors, and no prisoners are taken. I was very present at the last meeting, so was the Deputy Premier, and I can tell you now that I was in there fighting for Logan to try and get a better deal for us. We have been burdening the, sorry, I'll rephrase that. We have been doing the heavy lifting, and as a result of that, with the two Flagstone and Yarrabilba satellite cities, we are doing a lot of the lifting for South East Queensland. We need to probably get the regional plan right to make sure that we don't have to do all the heavy lifting, because we are stretched out like brown cows with our social infrastructure. As I've said in many of these meetings before, it's important that we get a better deal, because we cannot deal with such development on a broad scale, spread out. Other local authorities need to do their share of the heavy lifting. Quite clearly we have been doing it, and that's why our numbers are increasing. Unfortunately, it stretches us out, and if we don't get the regional plan right, of course the planning scheme will fall into play, but it's the other factors, the emerging budgets that we'll have to deal with, and the pressure that will be put on every councillor in this room to, one, keep the rates down, but also to satisfy residents who are moving into the city. This will be huge. And I can tell you now, I'm in there batting, and I know what I'm doing. And obviously I'm getting assistance from the two Daves here to try and reduce the damage. And when I say damage, it's stretching us out too far. And as you know, each year we're borrowing a lot of money from that infrastructure agreement in regards to satellite cities, and we have to obviously look after the council as a whole, and we need to make sure that we are better represented and get a better deal. So I'll just leave it at that. But the planning scheme is very important, but it obviously, the regional plan is even more important for us at the moment. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have Councillor Wilcox, myself and Councillor Bannon.
Thank you, Councillor Power. Just to touch on it, the state put the 2 PDAs where you have to drive through acreage lots to get to suburban lots, which is why we're so stretched as a council, because I keep getting told we don't have the population in the PDAs, yet it's because you have to drive through the acreage lots where there isn't a lot of people living there until you get into those suburban lots. So it is a stretch, but we are fighting for it. Just on that, just wondering, in these discussions and that sort of thing, will we be able to talk, because I have so many acreage lots and I have so many people that live on 1, 2, 3, 4 acres, and they want to subdivide those lots but they're not allowed to. Will this be the time where I can put forward those residents that have emailed me, sent me letters going, we want to be able to subdivide our lots, not put an annex, not put a dual house, we want to be able to subdivide those lots so that we can actually give a 1/4 acre, a 1/2 acre, a full acre to our children and that sort of thing?
Through the chair, it's a good question, Councillor Wilcox. The important thing to understand is what is within council's influence under our scheme to control. So certainly the first part of the question, if we do have influence to change a zoning or to facilitate an outcome that's important to your community, we should definitely consider that. From what I've seen in the examples you've sent through to the team, a lot of those are constrained by the fact that they're within the regional landscape area of the South East Queensland Regional Plan, which, as the Mayor talked about, is under the state's control. So both processes are important. When we go into the refresh of the regional plan and the consultation around that, council makes a submission. So that the historic way that we do it, we spend time with you all, we scoop up all the issues that are important to you, we bring them for a decision, and they go forth for the state's consideration. So things around filling in some logical parts of the city for some continued rural residential development, that has been a position of council's past, and the state has considered those and made decisions on whether that's appropriate or not. So important to participate. It's just equally important to understand what our actual influence is on getting the outcomes and what commitments we should make to our community on our influence in that regard.
So long as those residents have got a voice through me and I'm being heard, because not only do they have 1, 2, 3, 4 acres, I've got people that have bought hundreds of acres thinking they would be able to subdivide it for their retirement and stuff like that, and they simply can't. So long as I'm able to submit those through you, and then they can also go through to the state so that they make sure they're being heard. And also thank you to Councillor Heremiah for touching on the emerging community zones, because I do have a lot of conflicting residents living there going, well, what can I do and what can't I do? So will that actually have a specific zone put over it, or how long will it just be classed as emerging communities for these residents?
Through the chair, so those are all the things that we'll need to consider, or council will need to consider as part of the new planning scheme. So the emerging community zone is a urban holding zone, but rezoning it is what the new planning scheme will need to consider.
Thank you, Councillor Wilcox. I just wanted to echo the sentiment of the Mayor that we are the only city in South East Queensland that is reaching or exceeding our density targets. So cities like Brisbane and the Gold Coast, they're not even getting close to them. They're actually derelict in their responsibilities to make sure that people in South East Queensland have a variety of places where they want to live. Now, I can't blame Brisbane and Gold Coast for being resistant to that, and I'm not really sure why people would want to move to Brisbane or Gold Coast anyway when they could live in Logan, and we're already doing all the hard work. But the advantage of being the only city that is hitting our density targets is when it comes to the regional plan, we can actually point to it and say, we're already a good citizen, we're doing the right thing. And so we want the ability to dictate, as a reward for that hard work that we're doing, that our community is bearing, we want to be able to dictate where our growth is going to be and what that growth is going to look like, and the planning scheme will help us do that. And that lets us protect the semi-rural lifestyle, the rural lifestyle, and the quarter-acre block. And it lets us focus our growth on areas that make sense, like near transport corridors and existing services. This process for the planning scheme is, you're literally looking 15 years into the future when this planning scheme expires in 2035, and trying to imagine what this city will look like. What will make your residents proud and happy to live in Logan, that you will make decisions on. The heavy lifting on this will be done for the next 18 months. The last council, in my opinion, didn't do a great job. Now, they had to combine 3 different planning schemes from 3 different cities together, which made it very challenging. It was a process that happened over 7 years, which made it a grind. But when I was first elected in 2016, I looked at a brand new planning scheme, and as a new councillor who had very limited understanding of planning, I could see that there were massive misses. And when you read the Logan Planning Scheme 2015 review, there are areas where there's no wonder that we're getting strange outcomes. What does it say in the report? Less than desirable outcomes. Because they didn't tie the strategic framework, which is the goals that we set for the city, the ambitions for the city, they didn't actually tie that to anything in the codes. So as soon as someone goes impact accessible and it goes to court, the strategic framework wasn't supporting the codes that were below it. Now, we can fix that this time around, and I know that with Dave and Dave's help, we're going to do an amazing job, but it requires the participation, the energy, and the long-term thinking of every single person in this room. Normally, councillors think in 5 to 10 year cycles, and we're going to stretch you out to think into 15 and 20 year cycles, but if we get this right, then we set the city up for success for generations to come, and I think we can do that. Are there any more questions for Dave or Dave? Nope. Is someone happy to move the motion? Thank you, Councillor Bradley, seconded by Councillor Wilcox. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That is carried unanimously. Thank you very much for your support. We'll now move on to item 5.2, which is a report on the Small Business Friendly Councils Initiative, and I'll refer to the manager, Mr. Radich, to speak to his report. Before I do that, though, do any councillors have any conflicts of interest they'd like to declare? None? Off you go, Dave.
Through the Chair, Logan's economic foundations are built on small business. Today I ask Council to sign a small business friendly charter MOU, which provides us the opportunity to join a network not just in Queensland but in Australia of councils that are committed to making sure that small businesses are supported in council. Some of the requirements under the charter, as outlined in the background paper, talk about the efficiencies of paying invoices, ensuring that we can promote businesses, helping them through some of the red tape processes. These are things that this council does really well. We've looked at the Small Business Friendly Charter and thought that this is a fantastic opportunity for council to endorse something, for us to put our name against the other great councils that are supporting small businesses. As I said, Logan is built on small businesses. This is a charter that I'm confident we can meet all the requirements, sign it, and form part of this great network across Australia. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dave. It's a fantastic initiative. I have Councillor Kransky and Councillor Power.
Firstly, a comment. I'm just really thrilled to see that we're being agile in the space of when our businesses are suffering under the impacts of COVID-19, but also there are a number of opportunities that presented themselves as part of COVID-19 as well. And, I think that's a big part of where we can be innovative in that space, is supporting those businesses to recognise those opportunities that are coming forward and support those that need support during this time. Dave, my question to you is, I note that this MOU is signed in conjunction with the local Chambers of Commerce. I wonder if you'd mind telling us how the Chambers of Commerce are currently going. We haven't heard too much news back from them, and I recognise that they would have been particularly impacted by what's happening with COVID. Would you mind giving us a quick snapshot on how they're tracking?
Through the Chair, so we have monthly meetings with the Chambers of Commerce, and the feedback from them is that businesses still are struggling. Businesses still are struggling in Logan, particularly small businesses with the lockdowns. Their role is to provide constant support to those businesses, which they are doing. But when I look at the budget that council handed down this year, I couldn't have thought about more of a budget that is supporting small businesses. There's so many incentives available for small businesses, and the Chambers really acknowledge that, and they appreciate our support. Numbers-wise, their numbers are steady. They've seen some increases in memberships over the time, but the feedback from Chambers are that businesses still struggling, specific ones that are affected by the lockdown, but they're there to support it, like this council's there to support small business.
Just in conclusion, I just want to say I'm really excited that we're taking an active or proactive step in this space, and you certainly have my complete support when it comes to supporting our local businesses and encouraging local buy and various other support networks. That we were talking just a moment ago about growth in our region, and of course with that needs to come employment and so on, and I'm looking forward to seeing where the Mayor's task force takes us with that also. So keep up the good work. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Councillor Kransky. I have Mayor Power and then Councillor Heremiah.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Dave, I recognise you're a top-performing officer, and when I read this report, I understand that we're doing a number of these initiatives already, but my question is there any underlying budget areas that we probably need to be mindful of or concerned about in the costings of some of these things? Because once, obviously, we tie ourselves into this, I could imagine that businesses might look at this and say, well, you know, their interpretation might be a little bit different than ours, and they might be concerned that we're not doing enough, and they might push us financially for assistance in some way or form. Is there any underlying areas there that I might need to be concerned about as budget enhancements, amendments, that we need to be? Is there any issues here that obviously might cost us that we haven't considered?
Through the Chair, there's none. With the recent initiatives of the new strategic procurement strategy and the new local buy, LOED's constant promotion of businesses, our close network of chamber presidents, plus the Mayor's task force, I don't foresee there being any additional budget impost on this by signing this.
Okay. The only budget impact might be you having a shout lunch for your phone going off during committee, Mr Mayor. I have Councillor Heremiah.
Thank you, Mr Chair. My question piggybacks off the Mayor's question. I see as a part of the Charter, it states that Council, if agreed, will publish a report in relation to Council's performance in relation to the initiative within 6 months of signing the Charter and once every 12 months thereafter. So assuming that these reports are authored internally, what's the estimated internal cost of doing up those reports?
Through Chair, this is just staff time. So my team provides this reporting as we report against the current economic development strategy. So it's just a matter of collecting that information and supplying it in a different form. So there's no external cost, a little bit of staff time, but it's really just providing important information and putting it together and submitting it to the Business Friendly Charter Group.
Thanks.
Councillor Bradley.
Thank you, through the Chair. Mr Radich, how many small businesses are there in our city now?
Through the Chair, I do usually know that. I think it is 20,000. Yeah. 20,000 small businesses, which are businesses with less than 25 employees.
Okay.
Yep.
And there's 3 chambers of commerce here we're referring to.
Correct.
How many businesses do they reflect or represent?
Collectively, I believe between the 3 chambers of commerce, and I hope they're not listening to this live stream, I think it is about just under 300, and I can check with the chambers and get back to you, but I believe it's just under 300.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Murphy, would you like to comment on that?
Thank you, through the Chair. Councillor Bradley, the chambers have memberships to the chambers through the small business, and Dave is right, at just under the 300, but that doesn't mean that the businesses can't access the chambers. They don't have to be members to join in or participate in any of their incentives. So and they have reciprocal membership, which crosses all over the region of Logan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. And I acknowledge that you were previously a president of a Chamber of Commerce, and I understand that. But the point I'm trying to emphasise is, whilst we are signing this charter, it does not necessarily represent all the small businesses in our city. So we just have to be mindful of that.
Thank you, Councillor Bradley. This charter came about during Small Business Month when I met the Small Business Commissioner, and she asked, why isn't Logan a small business friendly council? And of course I said, we already are. But if you want us to sign a piece of paper to prove that, we're totally willing to. So this is where we've gotten to. It's exciting, and as someone who used to have a small business, and I know how hard small business owners work, any support, even if it is essentially in saying loud and proud that we support small business, we want to see you here and we want to see you thrive, I think is great, and because any advantage small business can get is one that it wants. Councillors, do I have any further questions? Would someone like to move this motion? Thank you, Councillor Murphy, seconded by Councillor Karansky. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That has been carried unanimously, and the small businesses of the city, thank you. We're now going to move into item 5.3, which is a confidential report for the Slacks Creek Greenlink Stage 2 acquisition of property. Before I test if we need to move into confidential, do any councillors have any conflicts of interest they'd like to declare? As the report is confidential, it's considered necessary to take any discussions of this report into a closed session, as the report and confidential attachments contain information relating to council's budget. Do any councillors wish to move into closed session to discuss this item? There being none, councillors, I will put the motion unless you want to hear a very public and brief comment from Mr. Radich. He doesn't want to speak to it, so away we go. Would any councillors like to move this motion? Thank you, councillor. You want to speak? Oh, there's been an amendment. Stand by. Councillors, the motion before you is an amended motion. Did you want to speak to that? Yeah, go on.
So through the chair, apologies for the amended motion. It was just that the wording of the original refers to the real property description of the property in question. We don't typically do that when we buy land. So we've just removed that and cleaned up the reference to the delegation, which is to the CEO to manage the acquisition of this property.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. Mayor Power, are you still happy to move? Seconded by Councillor Russell. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. That is carried with the exception of Councillor Herremeyer.
Against.
Thank you very much. Councillors, that is the end of the Economic Development and Strategy Manager's report. Do you have any general business for Mr. Radich? Dave, do you have any general business for us?
No, I do not.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to item 6.1, which is a report into wildlife vehicle collision hotspot mapping. While we wait for the manager of the Health, Environment and Waste branch, Mr. Asnikar, to enter the room, I'll ask if any councillors have any conflicts of interest they would like to declare on this item. There being none, we will now play the elevator music. Do, 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 do. Look at that. Excellent timing, Michael. We're ready for you to speak to your wildlife vehicle collision hotspot mapping report.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Morning, councillors. This report presents the latest updated wildlife vehicle collision hotspot map. The priority hotspots have been scientifically identified based on an improved, what's called a multi-criteria analysis process. So that takes a whole range of data such as collision data, wildlife sightings data, animal rescues, as well as looking at road attributes such as average speeds, traffic volumes, and then ancillary to that, other things such as the context of the road in relationship to wildlife habitat, wildlife corridors, etc. So all that gets analysed and through our GIS process to produce the map that we've presented in this report. The hotspots map is therefore a priority from a road user perspective as well as an environmental and wildlife perspective. 21 hotspots have been identified across the city, both on council-controlled and state-controlled roads. These hotspots will be the focus locations for the implementation of a range of on-ground and community messaging, all funded by the Environment Levy. Where a road is a state road in the hotspot map, our program staff will proactively liaise with Transport and Main Roads to advocate for actions in those particular locations. In addition to the existing initiatives that Council undertakes, such as the virtual fences, the static signage, the banners, the community education, the socials around being mindful of wildlife in road areas, one of the new initiatives that we'll be seeking to trial in a number of these hotspots will be the electronic vehicle activated speed sign, the electronic flashing wildlife signs, and we're intending to roll that out over the course of this financial year. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I have questions from Councillor Kerensky and Councillor Stemp and Councillor Wilcox.
First of all, Michael, I'd just like to say I really welcome this report and this body of work, and that the officers have been so diligent in pulling this all together. One of the things we spoke about recently in a councillor meeting was that the data is fantastic and it draws on a number of different resources to pull that data together. But we acknowledge that there are gaps in the data. And I recently caught up with the Albert Valley Wilderness Society, and I talked to them about the number of roadkills in my electorate and others. And they simply don't get reported. And because they're not getting reported, then they actually don't focus, this body of work doesn't focus on those areas. Can I just ask, what can we be doing to proactively encourage people to report?
Through the Chair, yeah, it's an issue. I suppose the message to the community is please report any wildlife road kills or injured wildlife on roads, because as you say, that's the data that we rely on to bring into this process to identify, well, it's part of the hotspot identification process. So, yeah, again, happy to provide. I know we've provided social sort of content in the past to councillors, but the more that we can encourage councillors and through sort of the council processes to encourage that reporting, the better.
Yes, it's just, and it's a comment rather than a question, it's just a little ironic in a way that we're putting our resources, of course, into where we've identified that we have animals, but we know particularly in Division 4 and I suspect Division 9 and certainly Division 11, we have, you know, huge populations of native wildlife that's simply just not getting recognised in reporting like this. So, you know, I'm just keen to see that we do a bit of a advocacy piece around encouraging people to report, and then that way we can be focused on the preservation of these creatures in those regions. Thanks.
It's a great call to action, Councillor Kerensky. What's the best way for members of the public to report, Michael?
Well, the easiest way is either call Council's customer service line or online. We've got a wildlife sightings link on the website, but it's as simple as making that call to Council or an email to Council.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Councillor Stemp, the Deputy Chair enters the fray.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Similar to Councillor Kerensky, I've had similar people in my area concerns that things aren't being reported, or how the simplicity of being reported, I guess, in roadkills and so forth. So I guess, again, from my point of view, I'd like to see maybe some more detail on how simple it is to report, because people seem to think it's quite complicated, so they could simply just, so they're driving to work and I'm able to report it quite simply. And also there was I had a resident indicate that the form was a little bit, the online form was a little bit complicated, and whether or not we could simplify that slightly. So if there was an opportunity to pass that information on to, that would be great.
Thank you, Councillor Stemp. Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you. And I just wanted to say thank you because after the last meeting that we had in our briefing, I did ask Trevor to do another post up for me, and I shared it straight away when I was travelling just recently, and I did get quite a few comments and that sort of thing. So it is And I think now I'll put it on a recurring loop, maybe once every couple of weeks on my Facebook, so that people can phone in when they do find that there's a deceased animal, because I do know that I have a deceased fox on Teviot Road at the moment, which isn't nice, and I'm pretty sure it hasn't been reported yet. And I just wanted to say, just quickly, on page, God, I just took my glasses off, didn't I? Yeah.
Have you got that one, Michael? Fox on Teviot Road.
There's
Fox.
a fox
Anyone
on
else got
Teviot
any wildlife collisions they've seen? It still
Yeah.
counts. I think it still counts.
And on page 129, oh no, not that one. Where is it? Wrong page. Page 131, sorry. With the mitigation measures, with these, the proposed actions, because I've just ordered the flashing sign and a couple of footings and that sort of thing, and I'm going to share it with Councillor Fraser because he wants one spot as well. Where it's got H for Crest Road, because that's both in between Councillor Fraser and myself, and it's got between Crest Road and then Mount Lindsay Highway and Park Ridge Road. I don't understand that trial site just there. Like, are these trial sites, are they out of our control? Is that where you're going to put them anyway, those signs?
Yeah, so just to clarify that, so these particular locations are those that have been identified in the hotspot maps, which we will deliver those on-ground measures through the branch. Where councillors want signs which are outside this priority list, that's where we're talking to councillors individually in relation to having those funded from the LIB. Yep.
Perfect, because I was with the Goodna Newbeath Middle, that's where I wanted my signs, and then I can share it with Councillor Fraser in another spot as well. So we've got 4 spots to rotate it through. Perfect, just wanted to clarify that. So Div 11, we do have a nice flashy sign coming soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilcox. Any further questions? There being none, would someone like to move the report? Thank you, Councillor Karansky, seconded by Councillor Stemp. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That has been carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Councillors, that is the only report for the Health, Environment and Waste Manager. Do you have any general business for Michael? Michael, do you have any general business for us?
No.
Good. See you later. Councillors, there have been no reports for the Development Assessment Manager today, but if anyone has any general business, I do have the Acting Manager waiting outside. Would anyone like me to bring him in? No? Excellent. Then I declare this meeting closed at 10:27. Thank you.